Thank you, Nick, for joining us today. I've read quite a lot about you on the internet. And so, Nick is basically the co founder of CampusReel, which is essentially a platform where students can share, their campus experiences, which I feel is a very valuable resource because as an international student who recently moved to the US, I was going through a lot of videos just to see whether a school was a cultural fit or not for me, because it's a huge decision that you're making. And I think US itself is such a big country that it's not about like international students moving into the US universities, but also like if you are being in New York, if you're looking for something in Cali, you need to know how it looks like, whether or not it will be a great fit for you. So thank you so much, firstly, for creating such a platform. I have a few questions for you. It's like talking about your founding journey. So I want to know, like, did you personally face any such issues? Is that why like you came up with this idea? Or like how did you come about this idea, and why did you think that this can be a potential business where you can generate some profits as well?
Yeah, great. And I'm glad you shared a little bit about your story. When we kind of were first thinking through Campus Real, it was actually mostly through the lens of international students because, and I'll sort of get to like the progression, but we just recognized like there's such a big cultural gap and inability to get like detailed information about like what you're actually stepping into. Like a lot of students, it's their first time ever being in the US, let alone within this sort of like cultural environment and then a US institution. And so that was kind of the original idea. And then we realized like everybody is struggling in some way with this sort of exposure. To answer the question more directly, going into this, like my business partners, so I went to Colgate University in upstate New York for undergrad. My business partner was one of my friends at Colgate University, which I don't know if that's going to come up, but we can talk about just like the benefit of like starting with someone that you trust and having a co-founder. We just wanted to start a business. So we didn't actually come at this like with an educational expertise. We weren't necessarily trying to solve something in education. We both, I think, were of the mindset that like we just want to think of an idea that like could potentially exist. And we had like some confidence and self-belief and figured that we could maybe make that happen. The original idea for Campus Real was virtual reality college campus tours. So like putting on the headset and doing that sort of thing. That original idea just came up as just a business idea. Like again, it wasn't very targeted. We weren't like going into it with a purpose. That idea itself was not a great business for a lot of reasons that we kind of realized as we started to look into it. But what was really fortunate about that specific idea is it allowed us to look at the education space again with kind of fresh eyes and really at the college search part of that equation. So like my business partner and I had gone through it ourselves when we were transitioning from high school to college, but then you just kind of forget about it. And like, it's not really something that you think about too much after that. And so when we started looking into the experience and talking with high school students and talking with parents, we realized like there's all these inefficiencies and inequities that exist for the students that makes the process like a little bit miserable, honestly. Like there was so much anxiety and so much desperation that we were feeling from these students and parents. And one of the main things that we were recognizing that was a problem is that the culture and the community that you're stepping into when you go to a college is in a lot of ways, like that's everything. Like obviously the education is important and the classes you take and the professors. And so I'm not trying to like undermine that, but like there's a lot of great schools out there. And like most students would be happy at a bunch of different ones, whether they appreciate that or not while they're kind of going through the process. What is a problem is if you step into a place where culturally you just don't feel at home and it's not going to be your home for the next 4 years and you don't feel like you resonate with people. And at the time, the only way to get that understanding was to go visit the campus in person. International students, that's like almost impossible for most students to do this. Underrepresented students in the US who just don't have the resources or backing to be able to go explore these campuses, they're equally at a huge loss. And then even someone like myself, where like I came from a pretty privileged background and like had the opportunity to go visit campuses, geography is just a huge limiter. And I ended up sort of narrowing my pool to places that were convenient to visit because I didn't want to go anywhere that I hadn't visited. Whereas like now, after I've watched all these Campus Reel videos, like UC Santa Barbara on the West Coast, like I think would have really like gelled with me. I just wasn't going to go fly over there just to go visit. So it was sort of a process. We had to pivot a couple times as we were kind of thinking through. But to answer your question, like the most contained way possible, we started looking into the space and realized how unhappy a lot of the people going through it were and just wanted to help them out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I can like totally resonate with that because as I said, with my own experience, it makes things like really difficult. And I've also worked at an edtech startup based in Africa, which was also trying to do the same thing. And the problem that they were facing was a lot around bureaucracy when it comes to the cultural differences. So in order for you to in a way like break into the education sector of the US, where you have to, because the stakeholders are not just students, right? They are also the authorities at the institutions. So how did you manage that? And also like what other challenges that you faced when just putting the grounds for the startup?
Yeah, it's a great question because I think that like, there's a lot of different like paths that one can go down to get a business off the ground. But I think like you can sort of boil like the at the outset when you're first starting it out, like the thing that makes it really difficult in a lot of instances, you're sorry, I have a dog who's gonna be barking. I just hold on, give me 1 second. I just need to yell at him. Um, you basically you need to solve like a two-sided marketplace is how I think about it. And it's kind of the idea of like, I guess in our example, like we wanted to partner with institutions. We needed to have a platform for them to like kind of be able to like get involved in what's going on. At the time, we thought that the way we were going to build the platform out was through these institutional partnerships so that we could like have a platform to show the students. And so you have these like two stakeholders that you're trying to bring together, but when you're thinking through like the problem of it, it's like you kind of need them both to come to the table at the same time to be able to create the value that you're trying to provide for either one. And that's where I think certain types of businesses, like that's the core problem that a lot of people are trying to solve. It's like, how do we make this two-sided marketplace kind of work for us? And our experience was like we first went out and tried to like pitch colleges on this idea. Like, we're trying to sort of like create this type of video content, like bring to this to the forefront. We'd love to work with you to do this. All of their questions were like, how much traction do you have? How big is the website? How many analytics do you have, users, like all that sort of stuff. And so we're realizing like, especially educational institutions, like they're not going to take a bet on something that's completely unproven. Um, and so we're like, okay, like how can we showcase to them that like this video content is powerful if we can't use them to create it? And what we sort of like ended up doing is cutting the colleges out of the equation at the outset. So we spent 2.5 years, me and my business partner, just building out the platform on our own. We figured out ways to go get in front of college students to create video content. We set up this ambassador program and basically like didn't show what we were doing to anybody because like we didn't have a moat and we didn't really have protection and we didn't want people to steal our idea. And so we were kind of just like me and him just sort of like working for about 2 years, like without really putting it out there, just building and building. And we were able to create a platform where we sourced 15,000 videos from 300 college campuses and got a couple 100,000 students to come to the platform every year to sort of validate. And what we realized is like this type of content really hit a nerve. Like the engagement was like crazy. Like it was insane how long people were spending on it. Parents loved it. College counselors like started to adopt it. We started to get a lot of press written about us. And only then were we even able to like start the business of it, which was like going out to the colleges and trying to get them to sort of endorse the presence that we're building out.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
I know, so I read in one of your interviews where you talked about like entrepreneurs should be very careful when it comes to like raising funds. So you have been very careful about that in your own journey. So so as per your understanding, like when it comes to team building, right? So were you, so the reason I'm saying this is because when you raise funds, because you want to like, expand work on your platform and also like hire more people. So what qualities do you look for in people? Because multiple like different founders have different motivations to start their business. Some feel very passionate about the industry, some feel very passionate about the idea, some feel that it's just a, maybe it's a hype going on, so maybe they can make some money out of it.
Mhm.
So do you look for people who are passionate about the education space, or what's your criteria for building your team?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like this has been one of the bigger learning curves for me is that like hiring component of it. And like I'm still figuring it out myself. Like I'm by no means an expert. I think one of the most difficult things to do, honestly, is hire people and hire the right people and then like manage them properly. Like management, I find to be really difficult. I'm surprised and impressed that like huge entities are able to even function just when you have like that many people involved because people are complicated and they're emotional. And so it's just like there's a lot to work around. Um, we've made a lot of wrong decisions from a hiring perspective, which has taught me, I think, a lot about what it takes. One is like, and this is something that you can't really do like teach to someone. You just need to kind of go through it. Like you get better and better at sort of like picking up on things that people are saying as you're interviewing and like what they actually mean and like red flags or good things or like, it's a little bit of that like interpersonal kind of just like social science of being able to figure it out. The main lesson I think that I've learned is like two things. One is like, as the person hiring, be hyper transparent about what this role is and what you're expecting of them. I think when we were first starting off, especially like I was a little bit younger still, like the company was a little bit younger and we were trying to attract this top talent. And I felt like we sort of tried to bend a little bit to make the company what they wanted it to be. And I think like, especially people on the older side, sometimes they come into startups more so because they think it can give them something than the company itself. And so I think like what they really want is for this to afford them a lifestyle or compensation or whatever throughout their lives. And I think like we were just a little bit overly accommodating of that. So, one thing that I do now when I'm interviewing people is like, I pause and I say, listen, I'm just going to be completely transparent with you about like what this role is like, what we value and who we are. And this is what I see as the trade-offs. Like this is maybe the downside of it, but this is the benefit. If you are that type of person, if that motivates you and doesn't make you anxious, I think you'll be a good fit here. If what I just said is something that gives you anxiety, in transparency, I just don't think that this is a good fit. And so like what you're looking for on an interpersonal level is the fit where everyone needs to be rowing in the same direction. And if people are coming to the table trying to get something personally out of the company that doesn't align with where the company is trying to go, I wish them the best, but it's just, I guess, what we're not doing personally at CampusReel. And I don't think that's necessarily the right way to go about hiring. And then the second thing, and this might sound obvious, but it wasn't to us, is like hire people directly into jobs that they have a skill set for and they have a passion for. And I think like, I don't know if other startups did this, but I imagine it's probably similar in the early days. Like you hire people because you think they're competent and smart and can probably do a lot of things. And you hope that they can kind of come in and be generalists and like build out structure with you. In our experience, that hasn't worked so well. And the best hires that we've ever made is like someone who has a deep skill set in the specific thing. This is what they want to be doing with their time. And then we plug them in exactly to that. So again, this is just based on my own experience of what I've learned. I'm not sure if this like someone else might give completely different experience. But I do believe like this is the hardest part to me about scaling and growing. It's the people side of it. And there's not that much like good general advice out there because every instance is so different and people are just so different.
Yeah, that's a really insightful one, to be honest, because yeah, people are different and they have different motivations behind doing a job. Some just see it as like a 9 to 5, and some are more passionate where they want, where they might see this opportunity as a stepping stone for something that they want to, do next. So now talking about the platform. So I know you want to scale up, and then you want to be one of the top edtech platforms in the country, in the world, I would assume. So when it comes to building the platform and adding the features, how did you think that, okay, maybe for the X months we should have these many features, and then going forward we can add a few more? Like, how did that transition come about uh, for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually haven't no one's asked me that in that directive a way. I think like it really depends on what phase you're at in your company in terms of what products to build. Our company, like we've sort of had these very like notable transition points where things kind of change in terms of our priority structure. With when we were first just building out like the resource, like the platform itself without the colleges being involved. Um, Everything that we were doing. So I taking one step back, like I think one thing that helps when you're building is being really clear on like your KPIs, like your key performance indicators, and what you're trying to promote or create the effect of. And for us, it was like almost entirely about engagement with the video content and then bringing more people onto the platform. So when we were working just to build out the platform, like we had this software where we could watch, like we could see people's mouses, like how they were using the platform. And we were building around that almost entirely. Like we were trying to make this as frictionless as possible. Once we started institutional partnerships, we realized like we really only had this one product at the time, which was like the website itself. We felt really strongly that we needed to diversify our product set. So we didn't like have all of our eggs in one basket, kind of as the quote. So this was a little bit in a vacuum. We just kind of took some hunches on like what we thought would be valuable and where to build it. And then you put it into the marketplace and let the feedback come. So, we kind of created products in a vacuum for like 6 to 8 months. But now, like every development, I think for the most part that we build at this point is a direct piece of feedback that we got from one of our partners on what they want the platform to be. So, like the simplest way to say it is like you have to do stuff in a vacuum to get started with a startup. That's kind of the challenge of it. Like you have to do stuff with incomplete data. But the goal is to have everything be data driven as quickly as you can have it. And so you want to be getting into these really quick feedback loops where you're putting stuff in front of real users, watching their behavior, getting feedback on what's going on, and then iterating around that, as opposed to keeping it all in sort of your head and being like, I know what they want, I know what's going to work. Like the data trumps everything as opposed to like a hunch or an intuition about things.
So in terms of, I know you mentioned feedback. So was there a streamlined process that you had initially or even now, just to get feedback from the institutions and also the students? I know you said about Cursor, but was that the only thing, or did you actually speak to the early users of the platform?
Yeah, we did a lot of like focus group testing. And we talked with a bunch of high school students, a bunch of high school parents before we built anything. And then like, we would go to like a co-working space and buy a bunch of high school kids pizza and like have them just use the platform and kind of give us our feedback. And same with the parents and the college counselors. So we're always trying to get feedback from students. But the other thing that's just like a lesson that is, this is not my idea, it's something that like I heard and I learned, is like people are very bad about actually knowing what they want. And so you can't really take things at face value. Like they'll be like, oh, it'd be great if you build this or great if you build that. And then you build it and they never use it. So it's much easier, or it's much more reliable if you can actually be like more empirical about where you're building. And that's why it was helpful to be able to watch the cursor and watch the browser and just kind of see where they're actually getting tripped up without them telling us. With our partners, like, I mean, once you get into sort of like a customer service role, like there's no shortage of people coming to you saying they want this to be like this or this to be like that. So at this point, we don't have to do too much active. Like they're coming to us and letting us know. What we think through is like the priority structure. Like we have a laundry list of things that we want to build, and we just have to figure out what's the highest impact thing in any given moment.
Thank you for sharing that. So the next question is about user acquisitions. As you said that, you were talking to a lot of students who were using the platform. So I know you have in bits and pieces, you have already mentioned like how you acquired your like students for the platform or the institution. But for someone who is about to like, launch an EdTech platform where they might be doing, so what challenges do you think it comes to getting more users to your platform, and what challenges you particularly faced and what strategies did you use? And the second part, like a follow-up question, is that how did you scale that?
Yeah. So our user growth is almost entirely on the back of search engine optimization. We do a little bit of paid advertising and some like referral and kind of built-in stuff. But the thing that's like beneficial to companies in higher ed is that like we don't have to convince people to go to college or to search for colleges or to engage in this process. Like, I mean, moving forward, it might be a little bit more like that, but historically, like there's going to be 14 million students that just go to college every year, and they're going to be looking for information, and Google is like the engine that people use. So it's much more about like just capitalizing on what's already happening. So we were really big on search engine optimization. We had a platform that really lended itself towards search engine optimization. We're built entirely on video, which Google really promotes, and just the way our website is architected really worked. I think the challenge in this industry more than anything is building something of value so that students come back. There's a lot of like one and done platforms out there, and they're great and they provide value and they have good businesses. But we want it to be a platform where students come back like month over month, year over year, use us for different instances. And you can build in some hacks and some like email engagement and all that kind of stuff. But the most reliable way to do that at scale is to build something that people love. And so like equally what we focus on is like, yes, obviously bring the students in, but we want them to have an exceptional experience when they're on the platform. And that's where you can like grow and grow in a more organic way.
Okay, thank you so much. So coming to monetization part, because I think that is very important when it comes to making sure that the business is sustainable. So when you were building the platform, just your journey in terms of like when do you think then this can, we can generate some profits out of this, and who should be paying us? Should the students be paying us or the institutions be paying us? So how does that work for CampusReel, and how do you recommend like edtech entrepreneurs to go about this?
Yeah, we had a pretty unique journey, I think, through that. The first 3 years, we were asking ourselves that question constantly. Like we didn't make any money really for the first like 3 years of building out CampusReel. We weren't sure, like, do we charge students and families to use the platform? Do we like do some advertising, through it? Is it like a referral? Do we work with the colleges? Do we pay them? over those first 3 years, we were kind of trying to figure out, like, we didn't necessarily know that we were going to work with institutions. Like, that wasn't the go, like, we had that as an idea, but that's not what we were like 100% pushing towards. And so we found different ways that we could monetize our users. None of them were, we weren't getting a huge amount of momentum from like a business perspective. Like, the platform was growing, but we just weren't sure from the business mechanics of it. And then the pandemic hit, and that's when everything changed for us. That's when we started to have institutions coming to us and being like, "Hey, we see that you guys make video. We need this video. Are you able to help us make it with our students?" And we were like, "Yeah, I mean, we can try. Like, we're probably the most capable of doing it." And that's when our B2B business started, and that's where it was actually much more of like of that information feedback loop to kind of understand like how to price it and the products and all that sort of stuff. So, most entrepreneurs are not going to experience something like a pandemic. If they're starting now, they're just going to like just categorically shift where they're going at. So ours was a little bit unique in that like the colleges sort of indicated to us in a really active way, like, this is a viable business. But then it's like hugely challenging to like actually find the right, like, product market fit is talked about a lot. And I don't think people realize how much nuance there is in finding the product market fit. It's not just finding something that people like, it's find something that people are going to go out of their way to use, out of their way to buy, that the price point meshes so that you're getting as much people in, but you can also build a company that the products are kind of set up. So there's so many different things to think about. And these past 3 years, like, to me, we really only found product market fit like at the beginning of this year. And we've been at it for, 6, almost 7 years now. And it's just that building a startup is very rarely like the movie The Social Network, where you like, Facebook, where it just happens and it blows up. Like, the reason people hear about that is because it's the exception, not the rule. The rule is typically one foot in front of the other, like being just really thoughtful about the mechanics and getting yourself into these feedback loops so you can be making intelligent decisions, not just making decisions in a vacuum. So it's a little bit of a roundabout answer because there's just so much to it, and it's very dependent on kind of how things play out. Like, this is a bit of like, you just hope for the best in any moment. And whether it's like fortune or our own ability to do things or, opportunity, whatever, like, it just sort of played out in a way where we were able to get this thing going.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Now, thinking about the future of EdTech, and where does CampusReel like fit into it? So I don't like, when I say future, I don't mean like next, 10 years, 20 years, but if you were to think about next 3 years or next 5 years, where do you think like how things are going to look for the industry and the space, and how do you think like are there any emerging trends, and where like what's your, as a leader of the company, like what's your vision, where do you want to see CampusReel in that whole ecosystem?
Yeah. So I think like the huge push that's already happening, that's going to keep happening, is the move towards digital as like the recruitment landscape, as a not as opposed to in person, but like really really supportive to these in person recruitment tactics. I don't think that people are as aware of this on the outside as someone in the industry. Like, colleges are businesses the same way that any business is, and like students, there's a couple $100,000 like price tag basically associated with these students, and so like admissions offices are sales enterprises. Like, they don't really see themselves that way, and no one really looks at it like that, but that's exactly what they're doing. Historically, kind of forever, but definitely like pre-pandemic through, like, schools are very reliant on more like brick and mortar, in-person, boots on the ground kinds of recruitment. And so like they'll send reps all over the country and world to go like shake hands and like meet students in person and kind of try to get them to come to the institution. And then I don't know if this is obvious to other people on the outside, but like campus visits are like everything for an institution. Like, that is where they get to hard sell someone. That's where they can see the culture and the vibe, like all the stuff we're going for at CampusReel. And that's where you really get that like in-person sales opportunity, is honestly what it is. Historically, they've been a little behind the 8 ball as far as like how the internet can help and like what digital recruitment can do. So I think like where the industry is going is like way more slanting towards digital and actually like unlocking all that the internet has in terms of like the ability like to recruit and sell. Like, most businesses don't do a lot of boots on the ground stuff. It's like almost all digital. The other one thing that I think is just like playing in is like people are calling into question the value of an education, of higher education, more than they ever have before, like by far. Like, this is like very unprecedented, a big result of the pandemic, but also the result of just inflating costs of education and like what that actually means for someone's career trajectory. So in addition to them needing to become what I would say much more tech focused in terms of recruiting students, the value prop and messaging is just a little bit different. Like the pie is getting smaller and smaller. And like what I was saying at the beginning of the call, like, that 14 million students are going to come every year. That's not always going to be the case. And it's actually declining, like you can see it in the numbers. So that's where I think EdTech is going. What CampusReel is what we really do is help our partners recruit more efficiently on the internet. Like that's the end of the day, what we're trying to do. Video is just a super powerful way to do that. So it's not like the point of what we do is not to create the videos. The point is to use the videos for really meaningful digital engagement and recruitment activities. Video is just fantastic. So like where I see us in 3 years and kind of where we are currently is like, I want our partners to be redirecting their priorities and their thought process into this like digital landscape and using video in almost every single touch point that they have with students because it's just so powerful. So yeah, video and just like that calling into question of education are, I think, going to very, very radically transform how schools think about like selling their product, which is what they're doing.
Thank you for sharing that. I have a follow-up question on this. So, when it comes to building new partnerships, do you go after schools who are already convinced that your business is something that they could benefit from, or do you also spend some energy explaining to them that why they should be making this shift?
Yeah, I mean, if sorry, I'm just writing one question. If schools were just coming to us all the time, knowing that they need this product, our lives would be a lot easier. That's like it happens sometimes, but it's rarely the case, and it's partially I think because what we're doing is less so now that the narrative's kind of out. But when we were first starting, like schools were not thinking about video as much, and they weren't prioritizing it this way. There's so much narrative now around like authentic video and social media and all that sort of stuff. So like the awareness is there, but it's an uphill battle always. And I think like every company needs to have a huge amount of conviction of their value and what they're providing so that they can bring that same energy to the prospects or the potential clients. So I would say like typically when people come to us, they have this sort of like broad interest in what we can do in video. They don't what our challenge is to get them to see that this is not a nice to have, this is a need to have. And I think that's the challenge in the business is making that transition. And that's what like our sales team is becoming really good at doing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know we've talked about from your journey to where you see Campus Reel going. So to wrap this up, one final question, which coming back to like point zero where we talked about your co-founder, for example. So there are certain questions that I think founders need to answer for themselves when they are just starting out. So do I need a co-founder? Does it make sense to have a co-founder? Or just like broad level advice that you have based on some of the challenges that you personally felt, some of the questions that you needed to answer before you quit your full-time job or thought that this is what I want to do for the like a majority of my life. So please share.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple things that I would say to that some of them are direct answers, some of them are maybe a little bit to the side that I just wish like I knew kind of at the time, or maybe I need to go through the experience to learn it, but like it's just like really helpful stuff. One is like the hard part about running a startup from my perspective, or the hardest part, is the emotional side of it more than it is actually the mechanics of running a business. And I've said this before when people ask me these questions, like running a business, it's not that dissimilar to like any job that you would do. Like there's obviously components and there's like a lot less structure and you kind of need to figure it out. But in a lot of ways, like you get into the office, you clock in, you have like your sort of to-do list, you do stuff and you kind of move on. And like, yeah, it's like you have a lot more invested in it, but like it's not so much the mechanics that I would say like, someone like a SpaceX engineer, like what they're doing is probably way more difficult on sort of like a day-to-day like business side of, or sort of like execution side. What's incredibly, incredibly challenging is the emotional side of it, and the ability to tolerate so much uncertainty for such a long period of time without getting any sort of real validation or feedback that you're going in the right direction, especially early on. Like you have no idea. You don't even know what you're meant to be doing every day. You don't know if what you're doing is productive. It's just like very much this black box. And it can be kind of a lonely, isolating experience. Like, people just who don't do this don't quite understand what it actually feels like and what you're going through. And they can't tell if you're doing well or not. And there's sort of a lot of like you do feel like you're kind of contending with a lot of like maybe judgment from people, and judgment in yourself. Like you're not really sure and you're questioning. And so like and this is something I still haven't really heard anyone talk about, and I definitely hadn't going into it, is like the emotional side and the mental health component and the loneliness of it. And this is all getting back to like, I think having a co-founder is really, really important in the early days, but it's arguably more important that it's the right co-founder and that the trust is there. And that's what, like, my business partner Rob and I have a huge benefit of. Like, we were friends for 6 or 7 years before we became business partners. And so there's a lot that, like, it's just implicit and understood. Like, I can just trust him entirely and he can trust me. Like, and it's just, there's no question about that. And there never has been. Whereas, like, I've talked with other founders, or even like my brother who starts a company, where like they'll meet someone and start a business together. It's like they just, and it can turn bad and sort of contentious. So as an antidote to the emotional tax, how emotionally taxing this process can be, I think a co-founder is really important, but it needs to be the right co-founder. One or two other things that I would just like mention to people, like when if they're sort of thinking about doing this. One is, and I heard this when I was first starting my company, I was like, oh no, that doesn't matter. Like, the stupid advice, like, this is going to take way longer than you think it's going to. I think a lot of people, depending on their motivation, kind of want to like pump and dump, like get in there, work for a couple of years, like build something that's worth like $1 billion and like get out. And again, like, this is not a movie. This isn't The Social Network. The reason you know about Facebook is because like they're the 0.0001 exception to the rule. This takes a really long time, and you want it to take a long time. You need to be prepared. Like, you need to learn, and you need to really spend a lot of time critically thinking about what you're doing. If you become too successful too quickly, I think there's a huge possibility that you're going to actually implode after that, because you have not put in the work yet. You just haven't spent enough time sitting on it, and therefore you're not prepared. Like with us, we had been working for 3 years before the pandemic hit, and we had the opportunity, and we were ready. If that happened like 6 months in, we would have tanked 100%. Like, I'm positive of that. So that's the other thing. And then just the last thing I would say is, like, whether this is like helpful to people or not, is like, running a startup is not at all, I think, what most people think it's like. And again, like, I just think it comes from this sort of like TV movie version of startups where, it's like this like roller coaster ride. And like, I'll watch movies now, and like, there'll be these like little montages of them working on the company, and it's like a 30-second montage. And I'm like, that was like 8 months of your life, like working 12 hours a day. It's like, it's not like that. And so I would just like caution everybody to make sure that they're getting into this for the right reasons. And if you think like, if you're going to get into it, a little bit why I wanted to do it to start, which I know is misguided now, like, because you want an escape from corporate life, you think it's going to be really fun, like, oh, I get to be my own boss. It's not like I'm just as beholden to our clients and our board and our investors. Like, I'm working a job. I have a certain title, but it still feels like a job. And in a lot of ways, you kind of sometimes have to do work that's like so boring you really couldn't pay anyone to do it. So it's not this like release and this escape. It's, to me, you should run a company if you feel like you can't do anything else. Like, if that's what you feel so motivated to do, like, I just didn't really feel employable. I didn't want to work for anyone. So, it was either this or I was going to like bartend for my life. And so I think you need to kind of have that where it's just like, I just have to do this. Like, it's painful. The whole process is painful. It's not fun. It's incredibly emotionally taxing. It's super isolating. You're going to have a really hard time. But if that's who you are and you're cut out for it, then go for it. But I wouldn't do it because you think it's going to be like fun or some release, or it's like, yeah, I can make a bunch of money in like 2 years. Like, that almost never happens, from my perspective, at least.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know, like, because these days it's like, it feels like every third person wants to be an entrepreneur, and then there is
Yeah.
not the right reason behind that for them. Because as you said, and sometimes once you start this journey, you feel that you're in this big dark tunnel where, you want to believe that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, but you just know that you don't know when you'll be able to see that light. So having the right co-founder, or having the right mindset, or having the right attitude when things are bad, I think that's very important. And as I've read your previous interviews, I have, I could see that you're very authentic when it comes to sharing these experiences. So I thought it would be great for me to, chat with you once, and then I'm really glad that we had this conversation, and I'm sure that all the things that you have shared will be very helpful for entrepreneurs who are just starting out, especially because you also come from the tech space, and then I am working as a venture associate with the university's angel fund. I would love for the students also to see this, so that they have an avenue of like building a business, something that they believe in, but they are not feel they don't feel confident about. So I think this will really help them get started. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. Thanks for what you're doing. I think it's great.
Thank you so much.